Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. I hope you're ready for 2022. Just a couple of weeks away from seeing the brand new cars and a couple of months before we have lights out in the first race of 2022. So today what I thought we'd talk about is 2022, and in a similar vein to what I did a couple of weeks ago where I gave individual teams a New Year's resolution, I thought we'd go through the grid and give the drivers a new season resolution as we come to the end of January. Although I am going to leave Zhou and also Albon out of this video. I'm going to give them a little bit of leeway and, get them settled in 2022 before I start to critique them. I'm also going to go through in alphabetical order. So starting with Alonso for the first time in a while. I want to see Alonso keep up this positivity. If I was going to give him a New Year's resolution, it would just to be keeping this positivity that he has for Alpine and the team. He's been really galvanizing for Alpine, and I think has brought Ocon on massive leaps and bounds as well. Obviously helped Ocon to his first ever win, but more so has just been really positive about the team. And instead of directing his anger at the team or his teammate, which he's sometimes been known to do throughout his career, he's been directing it at the FIA. And that's maybe the thing that I love the most. The fact that he's talked to the FIA about track limits, about first laps, and has gone at the FIA and talked about it continually and got more drivers behind him along the way as well. I've just really enjoyed Alonso being on the grid again. And as much as I know that it's going to be a short stint with him on the grid, I think he could do some really, really cool things in 2022. Moving on to Bottas, second up. And I think Bottas, for me, needs to change his mindset in 2022. He's been the secondary driver at Mercedes for 5 years now. He's always been in the shadow of Lewis Hamilton. Now he's got an opportunity to move into a brand new team. He's got a rookie as a teammate. So he is being expected now to be that top driver in the team. And I want to see him really change his mindset, get into that rhythm of being the top driver in the team again and being a little bit more aggressive. I think I want to see from Bottas over the course of 2022. Pierre Gasly as well. I want to see a change from him, and in a slightly different way, I want to see Pierre Gasly change team for 2023. So if I was going to give him one thing he needs to do this season, for me, it would be try and find a contract outside of AlphaTauri. Now, if that's Red Bull, again, that's absolutely fine by me. If that is another team on the grid, I hope that it's a step up. Pierre Gasly has been incredibly good over the last 3 seasons. By far and away, one of the top 5 drivers on the grid for me. And he deserves that opportunity to step up into a proper big team. Let's see if he can do it at the front. Let's see if he can get consistent wins, consistent podiums, and maybe even challenge for a title if he's given the right hardware. Lewis Hamilton is 4th, and we're going to talk about Lewis Hamilton in a slightly negative vein, considering he's just come 2nd in the championship and literally lost out on the championship on the final lap of the final race. I think we've seen some uncharacteristic mistakes from Lewis Hamilton over the course of 2021, and if I was going to give him a New Year's resolution, it would be to try and, get rid of some of those mistakes we saw. I think Baku is the main one that comes to people's minds. Also Hungary, when he decided to stay out on the intermediate tyres, although you could maybe say that that was the team. Turkey, a similar sort of thing where the tyres got wrong. Again, you could maybe blame the team, but overall, there's been quite a few mistakes from Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton and the communication between them. And I'd like to see those, gotten rid of again. It was so uncharacteristic to see Lewis Hamilton making these mistakes. He's just been an absolute just torrent of success over the course of this era of Formula 1. And I want to see that again. I want to see him get up to that level again and get rid of some of those mistakes that we saw over the course of the season. Latifi has to break out of Russell's shadow for me. I think that's the main thing that Latifi needs to be focusing on as we go into 2022. He's always been there with George Russell. Obviously, George Russell has always been the prodigy of Mercedes. We knew he was going to move to a big team. That's finally happened. And now Nicholas Latifi is kind of set free a little bit. He's not going to be compared to George Russell anymore. He hasn't got those incredibly high heights to hit. Instead, he's going to be with Albon. Albon coming into Formula 1 for the first time in a while. It's going to be a different team dynamic for Latifi, but one I think that he really needs to step into and show that he is worthy of that Formula 1 place and that he's not just a pay driver. Charles Leclerc needs to beat his teammate for me. I think if you're going to give Charles Leclerc one criticism for last year, and It's very, very harsh. He got incredibly unlucky in some of those races along the course of the season. But for me, he needs to beat his teammate. He needs to beat Carlos Sainz and show that he is the number one at Ferrari. It's the first time that he lost to his teammate over the course of 2021. There was 2 DNFs in there. He did average a grid position of 6.5. Obviously, he had a couple of pole positions in there as well. Sainz only managed an average position of 7.9 when it came to qualifying. So Sainz was making up those positions in the races. And as I said, Charles Leclerc missed out on a couple of races too. But 1 podium to Carlos Sainz's 4 kind of shows that Charles Leclerc maybe wasn't on the level, you know, when the Ferrari was at the top, when the Ferrari was properly working for the team. He wasn't quite at the level of Carlos Sainz. And I think, you know, Charles Leclerc, if that's the one thing he needs to do, I don't think there's much he needs to improve, but I'd love to see him step forward and try and beat Carlos Sainz this season. Nikita Mazepin. I think Nikita Mazepin needs to change up his routine a little bit and find some relationships on the grid. I think when you're a rookie and you come into Formula One, you kind of need to find somebody who you can learn off of quickly. You know, we've seen Tsunoda and Gasly have a really lovely relationship. We've seen Vettel and Mick have a really lovely relationship over 2021. We haven't really seen that from Mazepin. We haven't seen him interacting with other drivers on the grid. We haven't seen him, you know, learning from other teams and other drivers as we go along. And I'd like to see that from Mazepin. You know, I want him to be involved more in the outside aspects of Formula One, getting to know the other drivers on the grid a little bit more. He feels very isolated, and he's not going to improve if he keeps himself isolated. I think you need that sort of more experienced driver to give you a little bit of help, and that's what Mick Schumacher has had. I think Mick Schumacher, on the other sort of side of the coin, has got that person. He's got Sebastian Vettel who can really guide him through. But those free practice crashes just need to be gotten rid of. Like, the fact that he missed qualifying so many times because he smashed into a wall or caused a lot of damage to that Haas car. He caused the most damage to the cars of any driver on the grid last year. And that needs to be eradicated for me. You know, he does need to start getting rid of those mistakes and starting to show the quality that he does have. Lando Norris is also a bit of a tricky one for me. Had an exceptional 2021 and I think would have ended up where Carlos Sainz did in the championship if it wasn't for a few races towards the end where McLaren really did struggle, and then also he got really unlucky with some punctures. It wasn't really his fault that he ended up 6th in the championship. What I think Lando Norris needs to do, and I've kind of talked about this a couple of times, is change the way that the media perceives Lando Norris. And I don't mean it in a way that he needs to be, you know, nasty or come out and be, you know, a bit of a villain. But I think he's so approachable. And the fact that, you know, he's got Quadrant, he does the streaming, he seems so likable and so lovely that the media actually treat him slightly different to any other driver on the grid. And I feel like he needs to just change that aspect of himself, that tiny little bit. This is a very minor criticism, and more so a criticism of the media. But I think Lando Norris needs to, you know, really enforce that change now. He is a proper Formula One driver. He's in his 4th season in Formula One. He should be talked about as a world champion. He shouldn't be talked about as, oh, has he got a girlfriend yet? Oh, is he going to, you know, go partying after this Grand Prix? He should be talked about in the same rhetoric as all the other drivers, and I don't think he is. And that's sort of one thing that really irks me about Lando Norris. Ocon, also, throwing him in with Alonso a little bit, I guess. I need to see the Ocon that I expected to see 3 or 4 years ago. I think Ocon has taken good steps forward. Obviously, he was with Daniel Ricciardo for a little while, is now with Fernando Alonso. He's been with drivers that are experienced and can help him quite a lot. Obviously, won his first ever Grand Prix this year, but is still not quite hitting the heights I maybe expected from him. You know, before George Russell, Ocon was seen as the guy that was going to go to Mercedes, replace Bottas, and be sort of that next era of driver for Mercedes, and it never quite clicked for him. But I do think that talent is still there. He's still got the ability to win races. Very nearly picked up a 2nd podium this season as well. You know, if he's there or thereabouts, he's got the qualities of a really, really good Formula One driver. I want to see that more. And therefore, I think, you know, if we're giving Ocon one thing he needs to do in 2022, is to try and beat Alonso. As difficult as that is going to be, I think if he beats Alonso in the same car, in the brand new Alpine, he's then showing, he's stamping his authority a little bit on that team. And then maybe it's Alonso that moves over for Piastri in the future. Moving up to Perez then in the Red Bull car. Managed to get himself another year-long contract with Red Bull. And for me, it's his qualifying performances. They weren't terrible, and they started to pick up towards the end of the season, to be fair. But I think if he's really going to stamp his authority on the team and show that he can be that secondary driver to Max Verstappen and really get closer to those teams at the front of the grid, then he's going to have to continually be a little bit quicker in qualifying. Now, it's never been Sergio Perez's forte. It's always been a little bit of a downside that he's had, and he's always made up for it in the races, and we saw that with his drives in Red Bull this season. But if he's going to be a proper big driver in a proper big team and not just seen as Max Verstappen's secondary, he needs to step up the qualifying a little bit and then continue the incredible form that he shows throughout the races as well. Daniel Ricciardo, is there only one thing that Daniel Ricciardo needs to do in 2022? Probably not. I think, it's a bit broad, but I'd say that Daniel Ricciardo really needs to find some consistency. I think the brand new cars, the fact that, we have been told that the cars are going to be closer to one another, the fact that, we are going to be able to follow a little bit more closely with these new Formula One cars in the 2022 era does lend itself to Daniel Ricciardo, but too many times he finished outside the top 10. 9 races this season, he didn't manage to pick up points. And Lando Norris only managed to miss out on the points 2 times. And it was Belgium when he hit the wall and Hungary when he got hit by Bottas. And Daniel Ricciardo 9 times missed out on the top 10 places. Needs to find some consistency, needs to find some pace in qualifying, and we need to see the old Daniel Ricciardo back in the races where he's going for moves, he's diving into corners, he's the latest of the late breakers, and that's exactly what we want to see in McLaren if he is going to move forward with the team. George Russell is a tricky one. Obviously, moving into Mercedes this year, he is going to be Lewis Hamilton's teammate for the first time. And I think George Russell needs to change the mentality of Mercedes more than he needs to change himself. I think he needs to see himself as more of a Rosberg character than a Bottas character. And I think he needs to show that the Mercedes team, he is more of a Rosberg character than a Bottas character. He is not going to play the second driver. He is not going to give everything to Lewis Hamilton. He is not going to just bend to the will of Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes whenever they need him to be. He's going to be more of that Rosberg. He's going to properly push Hamilton to his limits. He's going to find every single 10th that he can in qualifying in that car. He's going to beat Lewis Hamilton to pole positions. He's going to beat Lewis Hamilton in races as well. He needs to change the mentality of Mercedes back to being, okay, we've got 2 top drivers here, not a top driver and someone who is a secondary driver in the team. Carlos Sainz, being really, really harsh, needs to improve his qualifying. I think a slightly higher qualifying position from him would have been really, really nice to see. There were a few times he missed out on the top 10, not too many. Averaged a qualifying position of 7.9, which considering, you've got the 2 Mercedes, the 2 Red Bulls, and then his Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly all in there as well. 7.9 is not too bad, but I think he needs to, step up the qualifying and almost qualify where Pierre Gasly was this year or where Charles Leclerc was this year. Just edging up that tiny little bit to really take your season forward, but was the best of the rest. That main midfield driver ended up 5th in the championship, had an incredible year, picked up 4 podiums in his maiden season with Ferrari. There's not too much that Carlos Sainz needs to change, just being incredibly harsh there. Maybe get the tiniest bit better in qualifying. Lance Stroll needs to become a better teammate for me. I think if we're giving him one thing to work on in 2022, it's just being a little bit more cooperative when it comes to being with Sebastian Vettel. They're teammates again this season, and there was loads of times last year where it was just like Stroll and Vettel seemed to be falling over one another or fumbling into one another, even colliding in various different races. So I think Stroll just needs to be a little bit more of a team player, which seems strange to say because he wasn't incredibly bad. Like, it wasn't like every single race weekend we were seeing Vettel and Stroll go headbutting each other or smashing into one another, but it was just the occasional little thing here and there. You can see that there was maybe a little bit of tension in the team between them, and I think if Stroll is going to take that next step forward, Sebastian Vettel is one of the best drivers to learn off of on the grid. Like, he has shown that he can do it at the absolute top level in a Red Bull and in a Ferrari. Yes, it kind of dipped off towards the end, but an incredible teammate to have and somebody that you would want to learn off of, to be honest. And I think Stroll's maybe missed out on that a little bit. Yuki Tsunoda is next, and he needs to start afresh with Red Bull, really. Yuki Tsunoda needs to see 2021 as, that rookie season. Put it out of his mind. See that as a season where he was learning new things, learning the grid, learning how things worked in Formula One, and really sort of put that behind him. Take the positives and leave the negatives, because AlphaTauri are going to be harsher on him this year. They're going to expect more, and he needs to forget about praise and criticism. I think lots of times we saw Yuki Tsunoda just starting to really creep up, and then he'd get lots and lots of praise in the case of the first race of the season, where everybody said he was going to be the best rookie we've ever seen, and then he dropped off a cliff. Or you've got the likes of Mexico, where he made a tiny little mistake, in my opinion, and wasn't really that much of a mistake. He was trying to get out of the way of the Red Bulls, got absolutely hammered by the Red Bull team afterwards, and again we saw an absolute nosedive in his performances. He needs to be able to sort of take that criticism, take that praise that is always going to come from a team like Red Bull, and just sort of wash it away from him and be prepared for the next race and take it in his stride a little bit more. Max Verstappen, what do you say about the world champion? I think when it comes to Max Verstappen, it's not on the track that I want him to change his mentality. It's maybe just a little bit off the track. I think he needs to rein in his temper just a tiny little bit. And I know it's what makes him him. It's what makes him aggressive on the track. It's what makes him go for absolutely every single gap that is there. And it's what's led to him being an exceptional world champion and well-deserved in a season where he was battling with Lewis Hamilton, one of the greatest drivers we will ever see. But I think for me, he just needs to rein in his temper that tiny little bit. I think we've seen a couple of times the media get under his skin, and that starts to perpetuate, and the media start to realize that they can do that, and they will take advantage of that. So I think he just needs to rein that in. I think Hungary comes to mind for me just after Silverstone. He's getting asked the same question 100 times, but he kind of just needs to take it. And for me, there was a lot of fault when there were comings together with Lewis Hamilton and him. I think you can say that, 60% of those comings together were maybe Max Verstappen's fault, to maybe 40 or 30% Lewis Hamilton. I think they were slightly edging towards Max Verstappen. As I said, I still want to see him being aggressive. I still want to see that driving style from him. But I think there's a balance. There's a rein in. And I don't want him to lose that edge that he's got. That is the extra 1% that puts him at the top of the grid. But at the same time, putting people in danger, the media will get on his back. I think he needs to rein it in just a tiny, tiny little bit. And then finally, Sebastian Vettel. 18 drivers on the grid, 18 New Year's resolutions, and similar to Hamilton, actually, with Sebastian Vettel, I think the mistakes came in this Aston Martin season. I think the spin in Silverstone comes to mind for me, where it's a mistake that I didn't really expect to see from Sebastian Vettel. It's not the kind of thing that we generally see from him. Aston Martin didn't have a great year, to be fair. It wasn't a vintage Aston Martin year where Vettel could come out and do exceptionally well. He managed to pick up 2 podiums, obviously one of them taken away after the race. But similar to Lewis Hamilton, an experienced driver where some mistakes started to creep in where I wasn't expecting it. And I'd like to see those mistakes reined in a tiny little bit over the course of 2022. So there are my 18 New Year's resolutions for the 18 drivers coming back onto the grid in 2022. What do you think of my opinions? Am I talking absolute nonsense? Let me know in the comments down below. If you've got a New Year's resolution for one of the drivers, or even the 2 new drivers to the grid, well, Albon, kind of new driver / rookie to the grid this season, let me know in the comments down below as well. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you are new to the channel. Subscribe as well whilst you're down there. And I will see you next time.